Okay, class, before you begin your homework, which is the chart on the back side of the political party's handout that you received in class, I wanted to take some time through a quick presentation just to go over some definitions that I intended to go over in class before it ended yesterday. However, we did not quite get there. So what I want to do is just describe what a party coalition is, what a critical election is, and what party realignment is before you guys even begin your reading. So it'd be best to go ahead and listen to this, take some notes, think about all these major definitions, and then you can continue on with the reading, and then hopefully it'll be more clear. So when you're looking at the page here, you can see, let's move this guy over. We are talking really, I want to first of all make sure we really understand what I mean on a focus first on a party coalition. Before we even talk about party eras, a coalition is a group of people that have a common interest, or a group of people that are all making up the political party. So the coalition is an assortment of different types of people that all follow the same political party. So you would say today, for example, that if you were to say, we talked about the gender gap last week, that generally women tend to be more liberal than men. Now, not absolute. Remember that's not absolute. However, when we talk about the Democratic Party's coalition, you might say that women are maybe one group that might make up the Democratic Party coalition. That's not really necessarily true, because there are a lot of women, obviously, that identify with the Republican Party as well. So let's use other examples of groups of people that identify with the Democratic Party to make up the Democratic Party coalition today. One of those groups of people today are African Americans, and that is a part of the Democratic Party coalition. So you want to think about the fact that the coalition is a group of people that, while they all might be different groups, they all come together and are a part of the same party. The reason why we have party coalitions is because we only have two major political parties. So there's only two real parties for people to choose from, which is going to create a nice assortment of people to identify with that group or with that political party. So what's happened over time is the party coalitions change. So what that means is the groups that identify with the political parties, those change over time. So, for example, while African Americans are a part of the Democratic coalition today, historically they have not always been a part of the Democratic Party coalition. Historically, they've actually identified with the Republican Party. Why does that happen? And that's where we're going to go. Let's go ahead and clear the ink here. That's because we have what's called party eras, which is on this page, this identification right here. The party eras are different historical time periods where you have the coalitions are the same. So one era, the political parties have their solid coalition. But then when the coalition changes, you end up in a new party era. So knowing that, so now we know hopefully what a coalition is. We know what the party eras are, these historical time periods where the coalitions are pretty much the same. Now let's look at critical election. A critical election is actually, when you look back in history, the time period you can identify the change in the party coalition. So we call it an electoral earthquake because it's an election that makes people identify with a different political party than what they identified with previously. So it's an election where, and it might be a series of elections. It might not just be one election. It could be several. So several 2 years in a row or 4 years, like every election, you start to see a shift of the party coalitions. And you really don't know a critical election is a critical election until you look back at it in history. After the critical election happens, you have a rearrangement of the party coalitions. That rearrangement, guys, is called party realignment, which is just new coalitions form. But also what happens here, once those new coalitions form, you have the political party that was primarily not in power shift over, because it's got a new coalition, to the party in power. So party realignment is not just about the new coalitions, it's about the party that has political power. So to have political power, what that means is to have a majority of your party elected to the government. So you make a majority of the House, a majority of the Senate. You might have you might continually be electing your party members to the presidency. So if you're that majority party, your coalition, you've got a majority coalition, which means most of the groups of people obviously identify with your party. When that critical election happens and the party coalitions change, what we often see is a party that was typically not successful in elections all of a sudden becomes more successful, and it goes from the minority party to the majority party. So I've got on the next page, hopefully something that will help you guys understand this. I'm going to move this guy over. So let's look at how this happens and what order this happens. So the first thing, this shouldn't say coalition, this should say election actually. So let's go ahead, let's change this before we even, so we don't confuse you guys. This should say critical election. So how does this all work? So we go first, the party has a coalition, which means they have a group of people that identify with their political party. I am, guys, if you're looking, I am right here. This is where I am. So you have a party coalition, which means that the Democrats and the Republicans both have separate groups of people that identify with their party. In this party coalition, you're going to have one party be the majority party, meaning they're winning more elections, and another party being the minority party, meaning they're not winning as many elections. They're still our political party that's got power in our government, but they don't have that majority power. The next thing that happens in this little scenario is a critical election, which means things start to change. The people that identify with your political parties, your coalitions start to change. So you go from, let's get to a pen, from the critical election, from the party coalition to a critical election. That critical election is really where change starts to happen. That's really where we start seeing a majority of the party membership changes. After the critical election, you then see the creation of new party coalitions. So if you're looking at your steps here, you have step 1, step 2, step 3. So new party coalitions, which means the party that previously was not winning elections now might have more people identifying with it in its coalition, so now it might start winning elections again. So when that happens, you then have the minority party maybe become the majority party, and you have what's called party realignment. So you're looking at a situation where you have groups of people, coalitions that identify with political parties. You have something historical change your government makeup and change the way people look at public policy. So they start to identify with a different political party. That change you can really see in this idea right here of a critical election. Once that election happens, and people that used to say, hey, I'm a Democrat, now they all start to say, hey, maybe I'm a Republican. And then what happens? The new coalitions form, which means you might have more people identifying with a different party, which puts that party in the majority, leaving the other party back to the minority. So what you're seeing here is shifts of majority power to minority power in our government. And make sure you understand that majority power means having more seats in our government, having more seats in the Senate, more seats in the House, and having the presidency. So today, who's the majority party in our government? We don't have a clear majority. We have what's called a divided government, because you have a majority of Republicans in the House, you have a majority of Democrats in the Senate, and you've got a Democratic president. And we'll look to see if that's going to change in the election come this November. So right now, we don't know if we're in a critical election or not, and you won't know that for a while. You won't know if maybe the year 2000 was a critical election. That's where history comes into play. So we only can look back now at the historical party eras. So if you look at the chart that you've been assigned over the weekend, what you are to do, and this is just the first little row of the chart. In the part where it says description, main issues during the period, I would identify and I'll type it right here, I would identify your main party coalitions. No, I'm not going to say main, I'm going to say just party coalitions. So you should identify who makes up Democrats, who makes up Republicans, what's the current description, what's happening during this time period. That's what I mean by main issues during this time period. I'll tell you guys the first thing you should know, the first party system wasn't Democrats and Republicans. You're going to identify Federalists and other parties. You're not going to necessarily always identify Democrats and Republicans. For critical election, you're identifying the election that made the coalitions that you describe in this column here. You're going to describe the election that made those groups change. So what happened, what election occurred that made people that said, hey, I'm no longer this party, I actually think I'm in this party now. What was the actual election year or years, it could be multiple, that occurred. And then in here, you're going to describe I'll write it here, the new party coalitions. That's actually what you're describing in this last column is, okay, what happened after the critical election. So you have the coalitions, what's going on during that time period, what election caused the groups to change? What are the new groups that formed in response to that? And that's what you guys should be doing over the weekend. The actual reading in the book goes from page 200, let's start you at 257, and take you all the way through to 266. So 257 to 266. At this point, you should probably have read the rest of that beginning part of chapter 8, but this one assignment goes with 257 to 266. And hopefully you understand that we've got a party coalition, the people that identify with their political parties. You have an election that occurs that changes that coalition. You have new party coalitions formed, and then you have new parties coming into the majority, a new party coming in the majority, which creates that party realignment, meaning you have a majority of that party continually getting reelected into our government. If you have any questions, you guys can shoot me an email or message me on Edmodo. Hopefully this presentation has made this assignment a little bit more manageable. I'll see you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend.